Robert, how are you?
Doing great, Jim. How are you?
Good.
How about that, huh?
He's been on my mind for the better part of a day.
Is that
Robert
so?
Silverson.
Yeah, Silverstone. Yeah. Well, he's one of only 483 boys, sons of Michigan, that are buried at that cemetery. 5% of the people buried in the Netherlands are from your state.
I always wonder, we always hear the story that about, and we're talking about the book Remember Us. And Robert, that the middle class started here in Detroit. You always hear the stories, but anytime that we talk about it on the air here in Detroit, there is this sense of duty that generationally that you see so many men and women will step up to serve. And you've got people that served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, everything. Do you find that to be true?
Well, no question about it, and I'm counting on that because, as you know, aside from telling this amazing story that I think we'll see a film of, and really an untold story about what happens to soldiers when they're killed on the battlefield. How did they get where they got to? Who dug these graves? What was that experience like? What were the families experiencing that were worrying about where their boys were, or those that had gotten the worst news possible? But there are still out of these Dutch grave adopters that every single grave has someone in the Netherlands that watches over the memory of that family and corresponds with the American families if they had the contact information. But the Army refused to provide that information at the end of the war, and no one's ever given it to them since. So they have about, of the 10,000 graves that are there today, all men except for 4 women, they only have contact information for about 20% of the American families.
Why?
Well, I think the government was concerned about privacy issues, and there were scams at some other cemeteries with people putting down flowers, taking a photograph, and send it to some relative in 1947 saying, "Send me $5 for the photograph." That didn't happen out there at the cemetery, and so the government just kind of blanket said, "We're not going to provide it." So the Monuments Men and Women Foundation, in conjunction with the Dutch Adoption Foundation, created a program called the Forever Promise Program. Foreverpromise.org is a website. And we have listed all 10,000 men and women that are buried there. It's searchable, and we're asking people to go there, see if there's a relative of yours that's buried there. If there is, there's a short questionnaire that pops up. It asks, what's your relationship? Are you aware there's an adoption program? Are you in contact with your adopter? Would you like to be? Will you let us share your contact information with the Grave Adoption Foundation in the Netherlands? Because some of these families in the Netherlands that have watched over the American boys have photographs or unsent letters from the times that the boys were living in their home or living in their barn, and they are literally dying to share it with the Americans, but they don't know how to reach them. So this is a chance. As I said, I'm counting on that incredible loyalty of people in Michigan to come forward and go help us find those families, and let's put them in touch with the Dutch adopters and finish in 2025 what they tried to do in 1945.
Tell me about Jeff Wiggins. The story of Jeff Wiggins to me is it's heartbreaking what he went through. But for you personally, when did you discover Jeff, and how did you come to write this into the story as part of it?
Well, I wrote Jeff Wiggins was a Black American who was born in Dothan, Alabama. And his earliest memory at 6 years old was hearing a crackling sound outside the shack he was living in with his brothers and sisters. And he opened the panels and saw a burning cross in the front in the yard at his house. And there were 25 Ku Klux Klansmen, including boys his age, wearing hoods, that were there to hang his daddy over the unpardonable sin of selling a bale of cotton because his family was starving. And the farmer didn't want to sell it because prices were low. And his grandma always told him, excuse me, if you can ever get out of here, do it. So he volunteered to go into the Army. He was 16 and a half. He lied about his age. He went in as a quartermaster troop, but he wanted to prove that he was just as worthy as a white American. And then he was on the back of a truck one morning, and his commanding officer said, "Get the guys ready, 4 a.m. in the morning. Where are we going, sir? You'll find out when we get there." And they pulled up and heard the sound of picks and shovels hitting the ground. They could begin to smell the smells, and they opened the tarp on the back of the truck and realized they were there to dig graves. And this is an incredibly dangerous, because a lot of the soldiers' bodies had live ammunition on them, an incredibly tactile task because there weren't any coffins, there wasn't any wood. They're burying the bodies in bed sacks. And it's just the most gruesome task of the Army, but it's a functional element of war we've never heard about because
We have it. Yeah.
you know, sure, it's depressing, but that's not the end of our story. Our story is inspiring because of what the Dutch did to honor and thank their American liberators. I mean, even during the war, they're trying to find an answer to the question, how do you thank your liberators when they're no longer alive to thank? And that's what led to them creating this grave adoption program.
It is, I spent 8 years in the submarine service, and my dad was a ranger in Korea, and I had uncles in Germany and Korea in the 50s and stuff. So, and my family, and I always wrestle with certain stories when the curse sunk. It was very personal to me. My wife understood. I get emotional thinking about it because I could relate to those men on that submarine, what they were
Yeah,
going through. And
sure.
I think as I'm starting to read this book, and my son Adam is 21 years old, and Robert, he found it on his own. I didn't even have to tell him I was talking to you. Um, there are generations of people on this side of the pond who are trying to understand what was given and what these families had to deal with. How do you keep yourself emotionally in check during this writing process?
I tell my wife at the end of each day, instead of asking me how my day was, ask me how many times I cried.
Really?
And I still do. I mean, I speak to audiences. In fact, I'll be in Detroit at the Detroit Athletic Club on June 1st,
I'll be there.
June 2nd.
I'll be
Uh,
there.
Please come
Yeah.
introduce yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd
Uh,
love to.
and I don't ever make it through presentations without crying several times because, so many, and during World War II, and you know this, we had 125 million Americans and 15 million men and women who were in service, but everybody that wasn't in service was somehow engaged in the war. Nobody
Right.
escaped it. Now we have 335 million Americans being protected by 1.5 million Americans. And unless you have a family that's in military, you don't have to care. You don't have to be involved. And that's not right, in my opinion. So what I'm trying to do is get people to understand, Memorial Day, go to the baseball park, enjoy your 3 days off, but that's not what it's about. It's about saying thank you to the men and women who have allowed us to go to the baseball park and do all the other stuff that we do, because freedom is not free. And this book is an effort to tell you, you know what? It's not only not free, it's costly, it's ugly, it's painful, and you need to know all that. It's not a Game Boy, it's not a Marvel movie that blows up. This is what really happens, and this is the cost of it, and why we should be so grateful for the freedom we've got.
When was the first time you went to Limburg?
I actually went there in 1997 or 98 because they had a big art fair, and I was studying art and architecture, working on the Monuments Men story.
Right.
And I knew about the cemetery. And it wasn't until 2015 I met this amazing woman named Frida, who watched over one of the graves of the American monuments officers, the one monuments officer that was killed during combat. And she asked me, "Have you been to the American cemetery?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I've been there." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm real sure. I've been there." And she said, "So you know about the grave adoption program?" And I said, "The what?" And she said, "The grave adoption program." And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And I was embarrassed. And I think that the Dutch have been doing this for so long, for 80 continuous years, that they think it's normal. And therefore, it all stays within the community. They have 1,000 people on the waiting list to become adopters. The turnover is only 30 a year.
Never knew the story. Never knew this story, Robert.
I've never had anybody
never heard this
interrupt me
story.
and say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I know about it." I haven't had it happen yet.
Wow. Hey, looking forward to having you here in Detroit. More importantly, I encourage everyone. We do a feature here called I Thank You Friday. Every Friday, we feature a veteran or an organization, just to let people know it's not just Memorial and Veterans Day. You say thank you every day. They signed that blank check. They signed a blank check knowing full well. And this guy, Robert Silverston, 1942 is when he joined. He passed away. He died when he was 24 years old. He never got a life, but we did because of men and women like this guy. Thank you so much for the book, Robert.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate your support and look forward to meeting you soon. Take care.